why defense isn't everything. The Bastiodon Theorem. This actually just came out 4 days ago at time of streaming this, so I'm interested in this. Let's round this out, if you will.
In our video, Why Damage Isn't Everything, also known as the Rampardos Theorem, we explored why the capacity to dish out enormous damage in and of itself does not equate to an effective offensive Pokemon.
Right.
Today, we're exploring the flip side, which holds just as true. Just having amazing defensive stats is not enough to make a Pokemon a great defensive Pokemon. No. It sure helps, but there are so many more factors to consider. Yes, it's easy to see Blissey as the best special wall because of its ludicrously over-the-top HP and special defense, but Blissey wouldn't be nearly as good without its incredible utility move pool, typing that lacks weaknesses to nearly all common special moves, and even its relatively overlooked natural cure ability. It is thus far more than just pure bulk.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes a defensive Pokemon's auxiliary traits are more important than the bulk itself.
Is it bad that I see Landorus at this point now, and I just like lean back and just silently groan? As someone that actively uses Landorus.
Consider the quintessential example, Landorus Therian. Its defensive stats themselves are not that high. They're solid, obviously, but nothing crazy or anywhere close to it. Yet Lando T is one of the best Pokemon in the game at taking hits because of its incredible resistance-laden typing and, of course, its Intimidate ability. The fact it hits opponents hard in return even without investment and has a great...
I would say, and I'm making this in the background, I promise opening paint was relevant for this. I would say that making it so that it's types, yes, I would agree that types are better than stats itself. However, there is a sweet spot, and I'm going to be making a little graphic over here to showcase what I'm thinking.
Utility move pool of its own sure helps out. Even a stat one wouldn't often associate with defensive play, speed can be a major factor. For instance, Raikou is such an excellent special wall in GSC, in part because it is faster than just about everything it checks, meaning it can switch in and heal up even if it's in range of a 2-hit KO, which a slower wall could not do. As useful as these counter examples are, we're going to focus on 5 Pokemon that have incredible raw bulk, yet are lacking in other departments and are thus nowhere near the defensive presence they aspire to. For many Pokemon, this kind of struggle can be metagame dependent, as what made a good wall in an earlier gen doesn't always last, for example. But that's not quite what we're discussing here. We're focusing on Pokemon that have always struggled to translate their bulk into walling prowess.
Right.
Or why defense isn't everything. Also known
it's really
as
not.
the Bastiodon Theorem.
I mean, it's crude, but it's what I could make in the small time. So the way that I view it, and I actually view a lot of this in a very interesting light, I guess, because I am biased towards certain Pokemon. Like, ignore the lack of labels. I just didn't have enough time with paint. So what I'm trying to get at is, obviously you have one axis, which is going to be typing, right? The better typing you have, let's just assume this. The better typing you have, the better time you're going to have. So better, typing black versus, say, like... So let's say grass gets you there, electric can get you like there, water can get you like, I already fucked it up, it's scuffed. Don't worry about it, chat, you get what I'm trying to say, right? But then you have your stats over here, and your stats, the lower they are, they're over here, right? But then the higher you get, this is already fucking scuffed, I'm so sorry, chat. So there is a meeting point of typing versus stats, and it's exactly this type of graph to me. So, for example, right, you can be a dark ice type. You could be a Weavile. You could be a Chi-and-Pow, right? But if your stats are garbage, you're gonna fall to the fucking wayside, right? So we'll make blue circle for dark ice. You're gonna fall. Your typing is great, but your stats are fucking awful. So you're somewhere there. Alternatively, you could have abysmal typing, like Rampardos, for example, right? But instead of Rampardos being bad, right, Rampardos maybe has less of an attack. Maybe its ability shifts a little bit, although technically Rockhead is actually better. So you have the stats, but maybe the typing isn't the best, and you're kind of here in the sweet spot. This red spot right here, where a lot of people are going to be finding, where a lot of people are going to be finding where they actually want to use Pokemon, Rayquaza, Groudon, Zacian even, right? They have good typing, and they have good stats, is what I'm trying to get across. You know what? It was funny. It was a funny bit, okay? I love it.
Our first Pokemon, Wigglytuff, has always had solid traits on paper. Its HP stat is enormous, first of all, clocking in at a monstrous base 140. Normal typing only has one weakness, so
I'm sorry, you fucking cap at what now? 140? Jesus Christ.
Not going to be hit super effective often. Since Generation 3, Wigglytuff has also had recovery for not just itself, but for its teammates with Wish. In Gen 5, it started healing enormous proportions of teammates' health thanks to the new Wish mechanics, as opposed to the already great flat 50%. And in Gen 6, it gained an excellent new partial fairy typing, enhancing its defensive profile even further. However, Wigglytuff has never been a good wall. It hasn't been decent or okay either. It's always just been absolutely terrible, outclassed by just about everything around it. What went wrong? Well, as incredible as its base HP stat is, both its base defenses are absolutely pitiful. Thus, no matter how it splits its EVs, it's going to have an incredibly frail side. This wouldn't be too backbreaking necessarily, were it not for the fact that Wigglytuff isn't too great at taking hits even on the side it's invested in. This is mostly because—
So somebody in chat asked, is 140 HP big? Is 140 HP good? I have a couple examples for you. So, a Meta Menace, which you will always see, Kyogre. If there is a format where Kyogre and Groudon can be played in, they will be played in that format. I guarantee you it. Kyogre at base has 100 base HP. Primal still has 100 HP, right, because that doesn't really affect that. And let's take another bulkier Pokemon, Ferrothorn. If you've played Black and White, if you've played against the Ferrothorn without the proper counter, which is fire, you know how painful Ferrothorn is to deal with. What if I told you only has 74 base HP? 140 is thick with 3 Cs.
Because of how ludicrously low those stats are, but it certainly isn't helped out by Wigglytuff's other glaring flaws, most notably its normal typing. Normal typing works for Pokemon like Blissey and Gen 4 Clefable because they're able to tank common opposing attacks through excellent bulk. This does not work for Wigglytuff because it's not nearly as bulky, nor does it have the longevity of Clefable's Magic Guard. Even when Wigglytuff became a fairy type, it was held back by its partial normal typing because being immune to Ghost wasn't nearly as impactful as the fact that it was a fairy type that didn't resist fighting, missing out on one of the fairy type's most crucial attributes. Additionally, only being able to heal itself through Wish, thereby necessitating Protect for the purpose of receiving its own Wish, can be acceptable on bulky Pokemon like Jirachi, but on something as fragile as Wigglytuff is just another thing on a long list of exploitable flaws. Still, it all comes back to Wigglytuff's poor bulk. Its typing or reliance on Wish for recovery were not backbreaking flaws in and of themselves. They just exacerbated the already present issue of its subpar hit-taking ability. It's a shame because Wigglytuff's support move pool is superb, and it actually hits quite decently with a base 85 special attack stat, alongside a variety of valuable coverage. On a Pokemon with a better defensive profile, this would be greatly appreciated. Sadly, it's wasted with Wigglytuff. Wigglytuff is a prime example of a great HP stat and utility move pool betrayed by appalling defenses and is somewhat hindered by the flaws of normal typing.
Yeah, it really is, though.
Next, we've got Avalugg, who boasts an absolutely titanic base 184 defense stat. For context, that's more defense than Deoxys attack has attacking stats. It's not let down by a poor HP stat. On the contrary, its base 95 HP is quite excellent. Not only that, but it's got reliable healing in the form of Recover, and it has one of the best utility moves in the game, Rapid.
I didn't even know this thing had Recover, Jesus Christ.
Spin. Sure, its special defense is abysmal, but as mentioned in the Wigglytuff section, being fragile on one side is acceptable if you can tank hits well on the other, and Avalugg tanked physical hits like almost nothing else. The same went for Avalugg's awful speed. It wasn't even passive, as it could strike back for solid damage with its excellent base 117 attack stat. So why is it on this list? Well, Avalugg has pure ice typing, and that is bad news for a defensive Pokemon, seeing as ice is the single worst defensive type in the game. It's its weakness to Stealth Rock, though. Wait, as a Rapid Spinner, wasn't Avalugg responsible for removing rocks? Yes, it could be, but that's where its non-Stealth Rock flaws began overlapping with its Stealth Rock flaws. Its ice typing meant it only had one resistance, to ice. Valuable, but not nearly valuable enough to outweigh the fact that it also had a ton of weaknesses to incredibly common moves, which gave it an incredibly poor matchup against many Stealth Rockers, since they could pressure it with one of the many moves that was super effective against it, or just about any special attack. Avalugg was meant to be more of a wall that could act as a backup hazard remover, but with said Lead Ice typing, it struggled as a wall too, since the physical attackers it was meant to take on had such an easy time slamming it for super effective damage. Being a physical wall weak to Stealth Rock and fighting at the same time was especially terrible. Most of the time, the reason you'd want a Stealth Rock weak wall was because it resisted fighting, making the Rock's weakness worthwhile as a trade-off. Getting thrashed by Steel, Fire, and Rock moves was also not good, because those were seen on a huge percentage of physical attackers, and with said Rock's weakness, the fact was that Avalok couldn't even stomach neutral attacks too comfortably, which was a problem since it resisted next to nothing. Funnily enough, Avalok actually had the briefest of specific niches on Gen 7 OU stall teams, since it shrugged off Kieran Black's free shock turn Sub-Zero Slammer, but this didn't last, as its Stealth Rock weakness was too significant a hurdle to overcome. If Rocks were up, Kieran Black could HP Fire twice, and that be that. Avalok is potentially a good to great physical wall, but it's hindered too much by packing the worst defensive type in the game. If it had a better ability like Regenerator, it would definitely be better off. It just needs more tools to compensate for its flaws.
It does. It's too linear, if that makes sense. Dusknoir.
Our next Pokemon is, in one sense, the inverse of Wigglytuff. Dusknoir has utterly massive defense stats. The problem is that its HP is absolutely pathetic, which makes it not nearly as good at tanking all sorts of hits as its defenses would initially promise. Only taking, say, 50 damage from an attack is impressive at first glance, but when your entire HP stat is less than 300, that's not nearly as good as it would initially seem.
That's kind of bad.
This is, of course, exacerbated by another one of Dusknoir's significant problems, its lack of reliable healing. Pain Split, while potentially irritating offensive defensive tool, especially on a good Pokemon like Rotom Wash, is nowhere near an acceptable recovery alternative on a Pokemon meant to be a consistent hit taker, especially since Noir is so incredibly slow. Further impeding Dusknoir's hit taking ability is, once again, its typing. Now, Monoghost is definitely far from bad typing. It just doesn't have enough resistances for a Pokemon with Noir's otherwise meager defensive profile. Plus, once Dusknoir hits the field, it's not exactly threatening much in return. As great a move as Will-O-Wisp is, it can't do everything, and Noir's inability to pose any sort of other threat impedes it too greatly. It is the definition of passive, which is incredibly exploitable for all manner of teams in trying to break through it.
The thing with Pokemon is that if you're passive, your opponent's just going to capitalize on it. If you're going to sit there and protect for 3 turns, like, sure, you can fish for the protects, but what stops them from, like, you know, Swords Dancing up? What stops them from swapping out and trying to check, if not counter you? Like, playing passively in Pokemon, while doable, it comes with its risks. It is risk-reward.
What makes Dusknoir's case particularly sad was that its pre-evolution, Dusclops, already had the issue in Generation 3, and everyone got excited once it evolved into Noir in Generation 4. Base 100 attack was a huge step up, and it even had stab priority in Shadow Sneak. Sadly, base 100 attack barely cuts it on invested offensive Pokemon with hugely powerful stab attacks, so forget uninvested walls with no power behind its stab. The only way Dusknoir can really accomplish anything is if the opponent can't answer Will-O-Wisp, but there are a million other Wisp users that can also do that while being better Pokemon. It's a shame Dusknoir didn't exist in—
If you want a Will-O-Wisp user, and the people that play Pokemon, especially on competitive level in chat, are going to know exactly what I'm talking about, probably groan in their seats. If you want a Will-O-Wisp user, why aren't you just using Incineroar? Incineroar, if it's in a format, we'll see play, similar with Landorus.
In Gen 3. Instead, its competitive career has been teaching excited new trainers a harsh lesson about the reality of huge defenses backed by abysmal HP.
Yeah, I mean, that's an way to word it, I love him.
The counterpart to the Rampardos Theorem, Bastiodon is just as disappointing a letdown of potential as its counterpart. Its staggering defenses are bolstered by a typing loaded with resistances, which helps further alongside just good enough to be serviceable HP stat. It's slow and doesn't dish out almost any actual damage, but its support move pool is phenomenal, letting it mess with the opponent indirectly. Plus, its stabs have good super effective targets, meaning in a pinch, it can hit what it's supposed to just hard enough.
But it doesn't do things.
What's the issue? Well, Rock Steel is absolutely awful defensive typing.
Rock Steel, yes, is defensive typing as well. So here's the thing about, like, I would argue Blissey, right? It still furthers the game state. If you're sitting here trying to tank as a Bastiodon, or even just trying to tank in general, as Wigglytuff was also brought up, as Avalug was also brought up, what is it doing to further your game state, right? Like, and you could ask this across any game, hence why this is a theorem. You could apply this to other games, right? You could be playing Destiny Hero Defender Final Countdown on Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Okay, but, like, what else is furthering your game state? How are you keeping your opponent from not playing the game? Are you using Summon Limit? Are you using Gravity? Is it Gravity Bind? I think it's one of the trap cards. Gravity Bind. Negate Attack. Waboku. Right? What are you doing to advance your game state? Or Mystic Mine? Yes. However, it is banned, and I'm very sad because now I have to take it out of my striker deck. Anyways, like, what are you doing to further the game state? To further an game state. That doesn't mean attack your opponent. That doesn't mean reduce it to 0, right? But you're doing an thing to further the game state. In Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, right? You could look at something as like playing Boojins, right? You know, I'm going to go play Pot of Duality, right? Okay, you know, you're playing Pot of Duality, you are furthering the game state by getting an thing to your hand to attempt to go, you know, nuts on the combo. Maybe you get a Bujingi Crane, maybe you get an Honest, right? Like, you're doing something to further the game state. If you're playing Bastiodon, right, who, one, has an awful defensive typing, but two, and yes, while it does have super effective moves, it doesn't have the stats to really keep that in mind. Bastiodon, having to actually pull it up. Bastiodon. It has a 52, right? So at most you're hitting with a base 52, right? Even if you're hitting a... And I have to pull up the calculator, but I'm not super familiar with how to use them, so we'll just go here, right? Technically, Heavy Slam is also kind of cool, because it actually works off of the weight. I think it doesn't even max out, because they get maxes out way heavier, if I understand that correctly as well. So, like, you're firing off, like, subpar damage... But, like, what are you doing to further the game set? Are you taunting somebody? Why are you just not using Whimsicott at that point? Which I'm biased towards Whimsicott, as we've established. Why are you not using Whimsicott just to taunt? Oh, well, I'm actually using it for Protect. Okay, why literally not anyone else that uses Protect? You could use Blissey if you wanted to. Well, I'm using it for... I'm literally trying to see what you would even use this thing for. Wide Guard. Does Hitmontop not literally do the same thing, but it also packs Intimidate as well, and a fighting type? You know, Rock Slide. Have you seen Tyranitar, my dude? I'm like, don't get me wrong. Like, it's a Temp 6T situation. If you're not prepared for it and how to deal with it, you can do anything with any kind of Pokemon. You really can. The skill level for that just goes through the fucking roof. Rock Steel type being bad for the... It kind of is funny, yeah. It's pretty funny. But that being said, why I'm branching out to other games rather than Pokemon is... As the title states, right? As the title states, this is a theorem. This is the Bastiodon Theorem, and you can apply this to different games. Bastiodon wants to do X thing. However, its stats, while it wants to do X thing, its move pool and how its typing interact with the game around it. So, for example, its typing being bad defensively, right? That is actively working, we'll call it Z. Z is actively working against X, therefore leveling out and making it subpar at best, where something like Qin Pao, right? Well, yeah, it's not going to live the entire game, right? It's Dark Ice. Okay, its typing itself wants to be offensive. Its moves are being offensive. Its stats play into it being offensive as well. You have 3 for 3 on this Pokemon. At the very least, it's going to take notice. People are going to look at it, and people have noticed Qin Pao.
Weird, since individually, Rock and Steel are great defensive types, and together, they bring many new strengths to the plate. Steel's wonderful Stealth Rock weaknesses and Toxic immunity are bolstered by a newfound neutrality to fire, as well as offsetting Rock's Grass weakness. However, all of these benefits also come with the irreconcilable drawbacks of packing quadruple weaknesses to both fighting and ground, which are both...
Right there, that's where you fucked up. That's where you fucked up in design. And I'm not saying that Pokemon fucked up in their design. I'm saying, as a competitive Pokemon, if anything has a quad weakness to ground, it inherently needs to, like, right then and there, justify why I should use you. Because Landorus exists. Tyranitar exists. Doesn't get stabbed, but it exists. The amount of Earthquake users is terrifying. Justify why I should use you. Especially, even at a 2 times, I ask any Pokemon, like Centiskorch, for example, Miko's favorite, right? Centiskorch, why should I use you when you're weak to ground, right? And part of it's just because I really like Centiskorch, actually. I actually really think it's based. Hence why I got the Shining Legends, the shiny copies in the card game. But, like, I mean, it has to do an thing or something to justify you using it, because at that point... We're going back to what happened in the Rampardos Theorem video, where you have to be cognizant of everything else happening around it, right? If you're going into a ground-heavy format, having something that's 4x weak to ground, it doesn't further your game state, is just not the play.
incredibly common. Forget walling almost anything if they can slap on any fighting or ground move and instantly entirely invalidate you, or a water move for that matter, since Bastiodon's bulk, while great, didn't make it particularly good at taking those either. So Bastiodon wasn't useful defensively against much at all. And if you're not walling anything, then you're not getting many switch-in opportunities. This is especially troublesome for a Pokemon as reliant on indirect damage as Bastiodon. If that's how you hit the opponent, you need a lot of switch-in opportunities to make the most of it, as the power comes from the damage.
Okay, but as someone that really likes him, and I'm biased in this, why would I ever use this over Muck, specifically Alolan Muck? Well, Kip, they do different things. I mean, do they really, though? Like, DOT... bulky DOT users, right? I mean, you're gonna put Toxic on the fucking Muck anyways, let's be real. Like, especially Alolan Muck gaining Dark typing, you can Gunk Shot, you can Crunch with Stab, like, there's so much. Like, Muck can't miss Toxic. Exactly that, too. Why I'm mentioning, if you're using Toxic with a Bastiodon, especially with modern mechanics, because Poison types can't miss Toxic, why would you not just use Muck? Muck Theorem when?
Accumulating over time. If you can barely get on the field safely, you better be doing a ton of immediate damage once you're in, which of course Bastiodon couldn't dream of doing. The Bastiodon Theorem is named such because it perfectly encapsulates the concept of a Pokemon with amazing defensive stats that simply cannot use them. Other rock steel types like Aggron, Stakataka, and Probopass may have been better for their various tools, but their typing also held them back a lot. Bastiodon just had even less going for it, and yet it's not the #1 Pokemon on this list. What could be an even purer encapsulation of the defensive Pokemon incapable as a wall?
Incapable? Defensive? Let's see if I can guess this. Defensive Pokemon incapable. I know for a fact I've seen it. I'm trying to think. Muck versus Garbodor is just facts. Muck is in fact better than Garbodor. Except in the TCG where Garbodor's actually like cracked in certain formats. Like Garbotoxin's actually cracked. I don't think I know this one. Not offhand, at least. Ah! Here comes the boy! I love him.
That's right, none other than Shuckle, with whom the concepts we've discussed thus far come to their highest extremes. Shuckle's speed and attacking stats are practically non-existent on a molecular level. It's all about utility moves. Well, that's fine after all. What better Pokemon for such a role than that with the highest defensive stats in the game? Yes, Shuckle's defense and special defenses are unmatched, both clocking in at an utterly astonishing base 230. Of course, these best-in-game defenses don't really amount to much because they come along with one of the worst HP stats in the game, coming in at a base 20, which it shares with 5 first form Pokemon.
Shuckle's stats are sussy.
Mine Jr., and Pichu. The only Pokemon with lower HP stats are Diglett and Shedinja. In addition to its HP undercutting its bulk, Shuckle also struggles to take hits because its typing is rife with weaknesses, including none other than Stealth Rock, and it can't heal itself outside of leftovers and rest. This largely inept defensive profile meant that Shuckle...
We do not need to give Shuckle an evolution so it can get Eviolite. That would actually be cracked. Actually, hold up. Maybe that's actually what needs to happen.
Couldn't irritate the opponent with moves like Knockoff, Toxic, Encore, and Infestation nearly as much as it'd have liked. Shuckle has had niches before its access to both Stealth Rock and, more importantly, Sticky Web, but it hasn't used those moves in any walling capacity. It used them as part of its job as a tempo and stage-setting suicide lead on fast-paced hyper-offense
power trick
that abused Sticky Web, dropping the opponent.
Mega Gardevoir, my beloved. I like the shiny one.
Speed. Shuckle is the ultimate example of why defenses alone don't make a great wall. For example, it takes Mega Rayquaza's Dragon Ascent for roughly the same amount of damage as Tyranitar, who resists the move. That is astonishing. Trouble is, that same amount of damage is much, much greater percentage-wise for Shuckle. And that's before we get into the Stealth Rock weakness and the inability to deal out actual damage. Shuckle out Bastiodon's Bastiodon as the purest example of the Bastiodon Theorem. Made to wall, but not given the tools to actually do so. In conclusion, using defensive Pokemon, like any other aspect of the game, requires new...
This was done intentionally, right? Because people looked at whatever Bisharp's evolution is. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember at this point in time, but Bisharp got an evolution, right? And people immediately are like, boy, that's an Eviolite sitting there!
nuance. It'd be a pretty silly game if the choice was as simple as using the Pokemon with the highest defensive stats. The layered detail is what gives its interest. Half the best defensive Pokemon, like Landorus aren't perpetually unkillable behemoths. It's a mixture of their various traits that gives them their niche. Things that you wouldn't always consider relevant for defensive Pokemon are actually quite important things. Things like speed and the ability to hit back for one, as well as how their weaknesses work in relation to their strengths. For example, Bastiodon's many resistances don't amount to much of anything if the Pokemon using the move it resists can also easily slap on a super effective coverage move and effortlessly destroy it. Defense is important, and that's why it has to be done right. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, do you agree with our list? Was there any Pokemon that we should have listed? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well.
It's amazing. I loved everything about this. That is absolutely fucking based. No, like, I'm telling you, like, he does such good content. I'm letting the thing run out for the algorithm, and then I have a couple final points.
And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.
It would be a little too long to reiterate everything right now. You'll have to either watch it on the VOD or the channel. Because we just watched the whole video. It'd take a minute to explain it. Okay, yeah, we'll stop there. So, to the person that did ask, yes, Bisharp did get an evolution in King Gambit. So now Bisharp, as a quote-unquote fully evolved Pokemon as it used to be, now has access to Eviolite. So that's an thing you should definitely be, you know, caught up on. That being said, I'm going to go back to the beginning of the video. We're Blissey versus Wigglytuff, right? So, as was mentioned, right, 140 is thick. 255 is also thick, let's be real. The thing with Chansey is that Chansey can't take a physical hit, but can take a special hit. Wigglytuff, in both of its stats, is awful. So sure, it has the bulk, but it's a 9mm going through paper, right? Versus 9mm going through, you know, cement, arguably, because 135 is actually really fucking, like, actually relevant as a stat. So, to conclude both the theorems that have come out at this point, it's not just stats that matter. It also matters on typing, and it also matters on stat distribution. You can have a 255 in HP, but what do, right? To prevent you having 140, mediocre at everything, and just getting sneezed at by, like, you know, anything fighting or steel, right? So that's in brief summary of kind of, like, you know, what he was kind of looking at the beginning of the video. I absolutely love this. Can't wait for more False Swipe Gaming, you absolute fucking legend. I loved everything about that.